to communicate for marginalized African American students. Finally, I will explore effective teaching methods of instruction and writing across the curriculum for these particular students, which I'll pass out deeper into the presentation. Today, in the 21st century, there remains a disconnection, as I mentioned earlier, among minority students, various cultures, and the Western culture. Many of you all who are familiar with W.E.B. Du Bois and his double consciousness theory of African Americans sometimes feeling like two souls merged in one dark body and trying to merge the two together as one. To quote, the classroom culturalists may reach a theoretical dead end until they can empirically link classroom process to alleged effects, end of quote, by Fuller and Clark. Fuller and Clark's notions regarding culture, theory, and practical experiences in the class for students are problematic when one segment is not in conjunction with the other. Many teaching methods and writing courses are heavily influenced by Western culture. However, the United States of America consists of many citizens from various cultural backgrounds. Many students from cultural backgrounds that differ from Western cultures, such as African American, Chinese, Latino, and African students, etc., can place one at a serious disadvantage in academia. One may argue that minority students who are legal citizens of America are American. Therefore, surely they are familiar with Western culture and the content that's covered in most of the classes. To expect students, however, to already enter into a classroom with the assumption that minority students will already be familiar with mainstream pedagogies, or worse, to force such methods onto marginalized students without preparing them for such methodologies while ignoring their own personal cultural background to be implemented into educators' instruction, can place students at a disadvantage. Such practices are considered neocolonialism in education today. Neocolonialism can be defined as, quote, the impact of advanced nations on developing areas, in this case with special reference to their educational systems and intellectual life, end of quote, by Holtbaugh. Indeed, issues have been raised regarding cultural conflicts and teaching methodology in academia between writing educators and students in academia. The growing gap between many writing instructors and marginalized students results in minorities being at a cultural disadvantage if they are not familiar with the often Western cultural-driven teaching methodologies and praxis, leaving many students oppressed by the unconscious oppressors. Students who are ostracized from mainstream cultural teaching methods struggle with producing effective writings in standard written English, oral communication in standard English, and becoming acclimated with the academic discourse. Moreover, in an article entitled Education and Neocolonialism, Altbach, Ashby, and Kazemias and Epstein contend the following in regards to Western culture being projected on those who are unfamiliar with such practices but expected to accept and apply it in academia. Quote, neocolonialism can be quite open and obvious, such as the distribution of foreign textbooks in a classroom. It is, however, generally more subtle and includes the use of foreign technical advisors on matters of policy and the continuation of foreign administrative models and curricular patterns for schools. These teachers, regardless of their personal orientations, cannot but implement Western values and views in the schools. Most have maintained the colonial pattern of school administration, and many have altered the curriculum only slightly, thus retaining much of the orientation of colonial education. End of quote. Concerns regarding the oppressed and the decision to use or abandon colonial culture and culture during a post-colonialism era, and what I mean by post-colonialism era, we're in an era now of many marginalized students are trying to regain their identity back. Have recently become problematic for many English professors and professors across the curriculums in academia today who aim to produce better writers in all genres of writing in academia. This is especially problematic when a plethora of marginalized students whose first language is not standard English are obliged to adapt to mainstream theoretical teaching styles that are removed from many minority students' cultural background, causing many students of color to feel alienated and perform poorly in school. Moreover, many educators in the composition and rhetoric discourse, for example, in higher education, are exposed to numerous writing pedagogies that can be used as frameworks to teach students how to produce ideal writings in composition courses in academia. In addition, many of the current teaching methods of instruction have, as I mentioned before, been Western culturally influenced, and that's one of the reasons my second book is the anthology Postcolonial Composition Pedagogy. It looks at new types of or rethinking pedagogical styles, if you will, as our keynote speaker was saying as well, becoming more multicultural with our writings so that minority students can identify with content to improve their writing as well. Even when Western cultural pedagogies are used to teach non-Western students, this can be controversial and challenging unless the marginalized student's culture is also acknowledged and implemented into the method of instruction to produce better students. In addition, in the article Raising School Effects While Ignoring Culture, Local Conditions and the Influence of Classroom Tools, Rules, and Pedagogy, end of quote, article, Bruce Fuller and Prima Clark contend that, quote, it is the culturally constructed meanings attached to instructional tools and pedagogy that sustain this socialization process, not the material character of school inputs per se, end of quote. Indeed, there is a striking correlation between cultural and teaching style. The history of postcolonialism and neocolonialism and its influence in academia today has been researched exclusively by West Indian novelist George Lamming, and in his